Welcome to week 2, and I hope you enjoyed getting your granny on. In this week, I'm going to introduce you to the half and half square. I came up with this motif because I really loved this piece by Peter Blake, where you had the bold, bright, graphic stripes of the rainbow teamed with this block colour on one side, and I wanted to kind of recreate those stripes and that poppy colour, but in a granny square. In this square, we build on the techniques that we learned in the first week. So it's worked in actually 2 parts. You can see here, this is the first section that we work on and is half a granny square. So after you've got your granny square triangle base, we then start on the second side. The second side does this bold stripe, and we're still using our treble stitch, but we're working it into a different space to get this really different effect. That's what I love about crochet. It's using simple stitches, but worked in different ways to make hundreds of different combinations. Our half and half square is worked in 2 different colourways, just like working your granny squares. Our first colourway, we've got our bright orange being our bold half, and then we've got stripes using our pink, our royal, and our turquoise. And in our second colourway, we've got the pink to start off on our block side, and then we're working with the cupid, bright orange, and sunflower, both making really bright, bold, zingy combinations. You can pick whichever one that you want to start with, but you're going to want your 4 colours for each of your squares. So now I've showed you what your half and half square should look like. Grab your hooks and your yarns and let me show you how to make it. Building on from our granny square last week, we're now starting on our half and half square. You might recognise this first half we're going to start on, which uses our granny square technique, working our treble clusters. And we'll work this half as an independent triangle, and then we're going to work into our square, building this block half, still using trebles, but working them into the gaps of the stitches rather than in clusters. To start off, we're going to start off with our colour that we're using for our first side. So taking our first colour, we're going to set up our hand again. So we're doing our E, come in, grab to make our knot, and taking our hook. We're setting up our hand and we're working on the granny square triangle. So to start, we're going to chain 4 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and join that into our starting loop by joining with a slip stitch, so going into the first stitch to make our little U, holding, wrapping around and pulling through both to join in a slip stitch. So even though we're working in half and half, we're still starting off with a central loop. We're now going to want to actually this time chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this 4 out from the centre works as a fake treble, so 3 of those stitches work as 1 fake treble, and then 1 stitch at the end for our turn. Into this centre, we're now going to work 3 trebles, 2 chains, 3 trebles. So our first treble, so we've wrapped, gone through, we've got 3 on our hook, wrap, pull through 2, wrap, pull through 2. So wrap around, into the middle, pull from the back, 3 on our hook, wrap, pull through 2, wrap, pull through 2, and 1 more treble before we get to our corner chain. We're going to chain 2 for our corner, 1, 2, and now we're turning back, we're working 3 trebles, our first treble, our second treble, and our third treble. Now to complete this row, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to treble back into that centre. And this is the beginning half of our triangle. This time, instead of working full rounds, we're working rows, and we'll be working back and forth. So we want to chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, to get the height of the next row and our turning chain, which is our sort of fake corner, our 1 chain. we're now going to turn our work round. And so we're now working into the back, and you can tell what's the back and the front of your crochet because the front lies a little flatter, and you can see the chain along the edge looks like a plait, and on the back it's a little bit bumpier, and you see the bumps around the edge. So we're now working along the back of our work, and we've got our chain of 4. We're going to work 3 trebles into that first chain space directly below. 1 treble, 2 trebles, 3 trebles, and now we're going into chain space at the corner, working our 3 trebles, 2 chains, 3 trebles into the corner space. Our first treble, our second treble, our third treble, our 2 chains, so just like when we were doing the granny square corners, and working our 3 trebles back into that space. Now we're going to work into the space here. It's our chain space, but it looks like a bigger chain, so you just want to count along. If you're not sure where to go, you've got 3 trebles, 1, 2, 3, and then we're working into this space at the end. We're going to work 3 trebles, 1 chain, 1 treble. So our 3 trebles that work as our cluster. And then we work 1 chain, and then we treble into the same place. And you can start to see your triangle forming. We're now going to chain 4 up and turn to work back along the other side for our beginning of our 3rd row. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn your work over, and in our first chain space below, we're going to work 3 trebles. 1, 2, 3. And then following our rules for when we were making our granny square, along the straight we're going to work 1 cluster of 3 trebles in the space here, and then when we work over to our corner we're going to work 3 trebles, 2 chains, 3 trebles to increase in our corner space. So we're working 3 trebles as a cluster into the space along the edge. When we get to our corner, we're working 3 trebles, 2 chains, 3 trebles. And working back along, so we've got 3 trebles to form a cluster in our space along the edge. And in our final chain space, we're going to work 1 cluster, so 3 trebles, 1 chain, 1 treble to finish our row. So 3 trebles, 1 chain, 1 treble. And you can really start to see your triangle of half your granny growing. So we're now working on our 4th row, and we can use like our granny square by checking our clusters along the edge just to check we've got the right amount. So our 3rd row, we've got 3, 1, 2, 3. So we're now going on to our 4th row. So we want to start that off with our chain of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turning our work and following that pattern back along the edge. So we're going to do 3 trebles into that first chain space. 1, 2, 3. You're going to work 1 cluster into each of the spaces along the edge before the corner. So 3 trebles in each of those spaces. So in our corner, we're working 3 trebles, 2 chains, 3 trebles, the same as we did for our granny squares. And we're working back across, working 3 trebles as a cluster into each of the spaces along the straight edge. And in our final space, we're working 3 trebles, 1 chain, 1 treble to finish off our row. We've now worked 4 rows of our pattern, and we want to keep continuing till we have 6. So we're going to work the same. We're going to chain up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn our work. In the first hole, we're going to do 3 trebles. Along the edge, we're going to work a cluster into each space before the corner. When we reach our corner, we're going to work 3 trebles, 2 chains, 3 trebles to increase. Working back along the edge, working a cluster into each space between our clusters. And in our final space, working 3 trebles as a cluster, and then 1 chain, 1 treble. That completes our 5th round, and we're going to do 1 more of those following the same pattern. And in your last corner, we're going to work 3 trebles, one chain, 1 treble to finish off your round. You've got your half, your granny square, so we're going to fasten off by doing 1 extra chain, taking our scissors, snipping a nice long tail and pulling through. And you've now completed your first side. So now we've got our first side, we're going to begin on our second side. Our second side is going to introduce some new stitch formations and where we join in our colour. Because we've been working back and forth in rows, our piece of crochet doesn't really have a wrong or right side, so you can join in any side. And we're going to take our piece and we're going to work along this edge. This edge is formed of our chains and our trebles, and we're going to go over the side to join in. When I'm working over the sides of these, I'm going to refer to them as our treble posts, and our treble post is the length of the stitch. This side was worked in our granny square clusters. Our next side is going to be worked in trebles, but in more of a block formation, and we're working with 3 colour stripes. So we want to start off with our first colour, and we're going to start with it on our hook. So we're going to put our knot onto our hook, and we're going to join in. So we want to join into the space that is the right of the centre. So our centre is here where we worked in, and this space here is to the right. And we're going to join in with a double crochet join. Now a double crochet join looks more like a double crochet, and so it sort of hides and we can't see our join edge. So we're going to take our yarn and we're going to work into that first space over that treble post here. So we go into the space from the front, grab our yarn from the back, pull through, wrap round and pull through 2, just like a double crochet. I'm going to go through that again. So we're going to put our yarn on our hook. We're going into that space that's from the right of the centre, over the post here. So we come in, we grab our yarn and we pull through, so we've got 2 loops on our hook. We wrap round and we pull through 2. A double crochet is a shorter stitch than a treble, and that fits in there. We're now going to work into our centre, and we're going to work 3 trebles. 1, 2, 3. We're going to work 2 chains for our corner, 1, 2. We're going to work 3 more trebles, 1, 2, 3. Now we've worked our 3 trebles, we want to anchor over the chain on the other side in the same position, because we're infilling our square, building it up the other side until we match. So what we do here is we come and we're working a double crochet, so we're going into that space here, over the chain, grab our yarn from the back, pull it through, so we've got 2, wrap and pull through both to anchor it in place. And you can see we've infilled that first round. We're now going to work our height, so we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to double crochet into the next space along. So you want to just make sure that you've jumped one space up, because we're working into the space that's on the next row. And we come in, and we're going to double crochet. So we grab our yarn from the back, pull it through, so we've got 2 loops on our hook, wrap and pull through 2. And this is the beginning of our second round. We then want to turn our work, because we're working back on ourselves. And we're going to be working our trebles, but this time, instead of working in clusters, we're working between the stitches. Our first treble that we work goes in this very first space here, and it's the space between your side 1 and our new side. So we're working into the space to form our first treble. And then between the next 2 trebles, we're going to work 1 treble in each space. So wrap, and you're going between the stitches. So in the gap between stitches to work your treble to form a block row. So we're going to wrap between the next stitch. And as we get to the chain space in the corner, we're going to work 2 trebles, 2 chains, 2 trebles to turn. So our first treble, our second treble, chain 2, and then 2 more. Remember that this isn't the same amount as when working our granny square clusters, and we're only working 2 trebles, 2 chains, 2 trebles to turn in that block stitch corner. We're going to work 1 treble in between the next 2 trebles, so we're going to work 1 treble each, 1 treble, 1 treble, And in that final space, we're going to work 2 trebles, our first treble and our second treble, to match up with the other side of our row. And then we're going to anchor this and join this on our first side. So again, we're anchoring it by double crocheting and working into our second row up. So just make sure that you're going not into that first row again, into the second row, working over that chain or treble post, over the side, grab it, pull through, wrap and pull through both. And you can lay your work out and you should see that you've got your first 2 rows of colour infilling. And you can see the difference of working the trebles into each other, like in between the gaps, that you get a much solid infilled pattern rather than the lacy effect of the granny square. We're now going to join our second colour of this stripe in, and I'm going to show you how to do it in a slip stitch join as you go. So we're going to take our hook and you're going to hold your first colour. We're going to take our second colour so we can hold them together. And I'm going to hold them in my hand while I hold my hook. And I'm going to do a slip stitch. So I'm going to chain and pull it through. And then I'm just going to pull both of those ends tight to secure. Now you're going to be weaving in your ends at the end, so it won't come loose and undone, but this just helps you start off in exactly the right place that you want to start for your next colour. We're now going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to double crochet anchor into the next space, so we're working our next row. So we're jumping up, we're going over the edge, doing our double crochet join, and getting ready to turn our work. So we've done our first chain, which acts as our fake treble to get our height, and then we're going to turn our work over to work back along the row. So what you can do here with your join as well is just pull these tight to make sure they're nice and secure. You can either tuck these out of the way, or you can hold them along and go over your edge as you go to secure your ends while you're working. So we're now going to work between our stitches. So in our first place, we're going to do 1 treble into that first space below. And then we're going to work 1 treble between each of your trebles of the row below until we get to our corner. In our corner space, we're going to work 2 trebles, 2 chains, 2 trebles. And we're now working back along the other edge, working 1 treble between each of your trebles below until your final space. In our final space, we're working 2 trebles, 1, 2, and then we're ready to anchor over the next row with our double crochet. So we come up, make sure again you're in the space above where your last join is. I'm going to double crochet over that chain or treble post. That's our 3rd row. What you can do at the end of each row is just double check and count your stitches across to make sure you've got the same amount on each side and that you're adding up with the pattern. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now I'm ready to go on to my next row. So So I'm going to chain up 3 for my height, 1, 2, 3, and it works as my fake treble, and then I'm going to double crochet anchor into the next row of our first side. So we're jumping up 1 row, double crocheting over the side of the chain or the treble post, and then we're ready to turn our work to work back along our edge. So we're going to do 1 treble into that first space, and then we're going to treble in between each of our trebles till we get to our corner. And in our corner, we're going to do 2 trebles, 2 chains, 2 trebles. I'm going to work back along the other edge, working 1 treble between each of our treble stitches until our final space. In our final space, we're going to work 2 trebles in that space to finish off the row. And we're going to secure it to our first side with a double crochet. We're working over the next chain or treble post with our double crochet anchor, so into the space, grab, wrap, pull through both. And we're going to join in our final colour. So we're taking our scissors, snip ourselves a nice long end, and we're working our join as you go slip stitch join again. So we've got our long end of our colour, we've got our new colour. We're going to hold them together. You can pinch them in your hook hand or your holding hand, and you're just going to do 1 chain, so like a slip stitch, and pull them nice and tight to secure. And just when you're doing your first chain after your join as you go, just make sure that you hold them tight. So we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3 for our height, and we're going to double crochet into our side 1 in the next row up to anchor. We're going to turn our work. Just give those ends a tug to make sure they're secure. And then we're going to work back along the row in our new colour. So we're going to treble into that first space. And then we're going to work 1 treble between each of the trebles along the row. In our corner, work 2 trebles, 2 chains, 2 trebles, and we're working back along the edge, working 1 treble between each of the trebles from the row below. And in our final space, between our first side and our second side, we're working 2 trebles. 1, 2. And completing that row with a double crochet join into our first side. So make sure again you're skipping up. So we're working into the 5th row of our first side, double crocheting over the chain or treble post. And that completes your 5th row of our second side, and now we're going to work on our 6th and final row. So we're going to chain up 3, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to double crochet into that last space here on our 6th row from our first side to join, anchor it. We're going to turn our work, and we're going to work back along. So we're working 1 treble into that first space between the first side and the second side, and then we're trebling between each of our trebles of the row below, and in our final space between the first side and our second side, we're working our final 2 trebles. And we're going to join in the corner of our side 1 with our final double crochet to complete our row. We're then going to fasten off by doing 1 more stitch, taking our scissors, snipping and pulling 3 to complete our half and half square. So to finish off our half and half square, what we want to do now, because we've got more colour, is to secure our ends. So you want to make sure we bring all our loose ends through to one side, and I'm going to make this side the front of my square because this is the side that I finished off my final side on the front. So we're going to take our ends, and I'm just going to use my hook to pull them all through to the back. And I'm going to turn my square over, ready to secure those ends. The reason we leave our ends nice and long is so we've got a long tail to sew in. And I like colour, and there's lots of colour in this blanket. So my top tip is to sew in your ends as you go. You're going to want to grab yourself a tapestry needle, and we're going to weave our colours in. Now the tip with sewing in your ends is really to match colour to colour. So I'm going to start with this outside one. Thread it up on my needle, and I'm going to weave along my edge. And you want to go through your stitches, weaving up and down through the back of the stitch, wiggling your needle through. You want to pull through, and you always want to make sure that you secure at least 8 centimetres of end, because you don't want your squares unravelling. So we sew through one way and give it a little pull so you don't make your crochet too tight, and then I'm going to sew back on myself. So along the same way that I came, I'm going to wiggle back in the same direction, going through my stitch, under and over, wiggle back through, pull along, pull out your square so you make sure it's not tightening, and then you can snip off your remaining end. We're going to work that for each of our ends, sewing in same colour to same colour, so they're nice and discreet. So through the back, and just make sure, especially when you're going under trebles, that you just wiggle your needle and you break the stitches that you're going through occasionally, because this will make sure that your yarn is really nice and secure, and that you don't just sew through one way and then come back and undo what you've worked. So we're going to wiggle back through. And when you've got a blanket or squares with lots of ends like this, it's really good to spread out your ends, working in different directions in different ways, to just make sure that you distribute where you're sewing your ends in. So really make sure once you're sewing that you pull your work out, that you're not ruching it together when you're sewing in your ends. So sew in your final end, following along with your stitches. If working along trebles, follow along the top of the stitch or work down with the stitch. Don't join up along the middle, because you'll start to see it will form a clump. So you want to work along the edge of the stitch or work down the treble post. Chop off your final end. And there you've completed your half and half square. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to make our half and half square and building on the skills that we learnt last week. In this one, we've learned how to use a couple of different joining methods with working with new colours, and we've also learned how putting that treble in a different place can create a really different effect. My top tip now, as we're starting to work with more multiple colours in each square, is to just do your ends as you go, sewing them in and weaving them in. I love colour, but I hate leaving all my ends to the end as it starts being like a big project. So just do those as you go, building your squares. Remember that you're going to want to make 4 in each colourway, so you have 8 squares in total. Remember to keep sharing your progress and tagging your pictures with the hashtag #SerdArMakes, so we can all see what everyone's making and join in this together. Next week, we'll be bringing you the Spotty Dotty. Look forward to seeing you then, and happy hooking!